for inviting me. One, well, two, because it got me into a building I've never been into, so I like to get into buildings. And three, because I think the scholar leader I did here at Miami is great in terms of residential life, but I think it's also really excellent because it allows you to spend time with other students who are beyond serious about their school. I mean, not that you're not interested in other things in your life, but I think you take your studies seriously. So I think it provides you with a context and a kind of social support system. So good for you. I assume you have to apply to get in here and compete.
Apply and interview. So there's 3 essays or other forms of expression. You have to 3 questions at least. A group interview and an individual interview.
That's wonderful. I mean, again, I think that just means you're invested in being here. By the way, there's pumpkin bread, which is fast disappearing. So I don't know if you get some now.
Literally go for it. Like,
yeah, you should because you know it's not. Yeah. We just added 2 people.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Also
Major?
Accountant.
Okay, and the other new person?
Sarah, I'm a computer science major.
Excellent. Okay, well, welcome all of you. Now, when I talked to Leah about this, I gave you a title, which I promptly wrote down and then lost the post-it. But I knew that it had something to do with challenges, so I thought, why not? You know. And by the way, did you ever get that slide I sent you?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, fine. And what I thought I would do is, well, this is what I thought I'd do. I thought I would tell you a bit about a specific fieldwork experience of mine. So I've worked in sub-Saharan Africa, in the countries of Tanzania twice, in Uganda, in Kenya, sort of a ecotourism turn in Rwanda to see mountain gorillas, and then over in West Africa in Senegal and Guinea. And this particular project was, I call it the heart of the Congo, aka DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. You might historically also know it as Zaire. And the reason I thought I would tell you about this particular journey is that it's one of the more difficult, and in a sense it speaks directly to what are the challenges of field work. And so what it really is going to be a slideshow, kind of put some images in your mind. I'll talk my way through the images. But then at the end, I want to kind of come back to 2, 3, and 4. You know, how do we understand risk from either a professional or a personal level? And if it's my perspective versus a student's perspective versus the parents of a student, then I want to touch on, and these will all be kind of folded together, ethics and really ethical dilemmas. What's the right thing to do in a given situation, and how do you know? And in this case, do ethics become situational? You know, we always think, well, I know what the right thing to do is. And then I just want to remind you, because I am an anthropologist, that whether I'm studying apes or whether I'm studying people here in Oxford, Ohio, I'm always sensitive to what I call cultural contexts. And then this term cultural relativism is a term that Garth would know about from 155. This perspective, the anthropological perspective of not judging a culture from your own point of view, but how is it functioning for the people who live there? And then in a sense, how do we, as individuals navigating the world and all of its challenges, how do we figure out what's a compromise and what's a reasonable thing to do? Now that may sound all grandiose and kind of vague, but I want to talk about some specific examples when I get to them. So first we're going to start our journey, and this field season that I'm going to talk about was in 2 different places, and mostly in the top one, a site called Louis Katal, and it's in a national park in DRC in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But this photo, in fact, comes from a sanctuary in Kinshasa, excuse me, which is the capital of the DRC. And those are all, sad to say, bushmeat babies. I don't mean that they're going into bushmeat, I mean that they are refugees from the bushmeat crisis. So a lot of apes are eaten in Africa, and often they take adults and either abandon infants or sell them. And so this is a sanctuary where a lot of these babies show up. You'll see them later in the presentation. So the first thing to imagine is, you know, you've taken a plane from the US to Europe, you've gotten an Air France flight that lands in Kinshasa. Kinshasa, and then you want to get to the field site. There is no infrastructure in in DRC. There are no roads, there are no commercial airlines, there's no postal service. Everything is kind of improvised. And the way that you fly in the DRC is that you charter planes. And you charter planes, interestingly, from flying missionaries. So if you want to get somewhere, you get these amazing pilots, and they're generally European or North American, and they have a mission, which basically is to do Christian missionary work, but they also provide these flying services. So you charter a plane like this, and you put in everything you need into this plane. This is a colleague of mine. And you make sure you have enough gas, and then you start the flight. And many hours later, and I'm always checking, any picture you take is mine. So you hardly ever see me in a picture because I'm either doing video or still photography. So there is the harbor in Kinshasa, which is a kind of miasma of pollution and busted boats and an interesting place, a difficult place. But eventually you start flying over the Congo Basin, and it is masses and masses of tropical rainforest, just to give you a sense. And I'm just going to jump to this image. You land on a pretty remote airstrip. You find a village because people are waiting for you at that village. And then, in a classic 19th century story, the porters arrive. And who are the porters? They're all young boys who are younger than you are. They're more like your brothers' age. And 13 of these young men arrive, and they each carry, because we're sending supplies into the camp, they're carrying between 80 and 100 pounds on their back.
Wow.
And they're carrying it for mile after mile after mile. They're carrying it across savanna. They're carrying it through forest. They're carrying it across shallow rivers. In some cases, they're carrying it, by the way, I put this in there because I wanted to remind you already of this notion of bushmeat in Africa. Now, I was talking about those babies, the parents, their mothers in particular, wind up being bushmeat. But people all over Africa are looking, you can see a snare up in here, are looking for wild protein. They'll either fish or they'll take animals from the forest. And so this is a young diker that was snared right by where we were going to go into the river, into these pirogues. Now, again, I want you to keep thinking, what would it be like? What could I do in this situation? How would I feel, and how would I think about my risk? These pirogues are dug out tree trunks, and I don't have a photo of, actually no, this one isn't in. There is a pirogue, and this guy has his plastic shoes on, which he doesn't want to get wet. right. So he's going to come up and chat with the other guys. But he was with a couple of other boys, and they had pirogues full of smoked bushmeat. So again, if you want to bring up bushmeat later, a lot of animals are captured in the forest, but because it's fresh meat, they're not going to last, so they smoke it. And then they bring it out smoked, and then it winds up in a conduit to a market. So they were basically chatting with each other and then getting ready to cross a river. Okay, you finally get to camp, and I want to give you a sense of, this is welcome Bill and Linda. So this is like a big feast. We're in the park, we're in the field camp. Anything you see has been created there. So whether, and a lot of this is made of saplings and palm from the local area, and of course a bottle, you keep it and use it as a candle holder. Everything is usually steel, that's a water filter, and the diet's pretty relentless, but it's pretty good also because there's fish locally available. And I just want to give you a sense of life in camp. There's a colleague of mine, Barbara Fruit. These are important because there's solar panels and all of your gear gets charged on them. Under here are tents where you live. These are important carrying cases because they have waterproof linings, and so if you're going to get stuff in and out and keep it safe, you carry it in that. This young man was leaving as we were coming in, so everybody was helping him get his stuff into these waterproof bags because, again, you're crossing a lot of rivers and you're carrying through some extreme weather. And so there they are, ready to leave camp. So we come in and they go out. And I just want you to kind of look at the Westerners, I want you to look at their clothing. I want you to look at these young men, all right? And all of these young men speak Lingala and a little bit of French, almost no English. Barbara's very fluent in Lingala, and this German field worker became a little fluent in Lingala. All of these guys come from a local village about 15, 20 miles away. So anytime they come in and out, they're covering that distance. And they're making what they consider to be good money, which is probably like $2 a day. And they're being paid by a project. Otherwise, nobody's making any money in that part of the country, except potentially through bushmeat. So what are you eating in camp? You're eating rice, a lot of rice. The other thing is that when a team comes in, they bring in fresh food, which is not going to last very long. You sort of put it out, try and keep it away from the rodents and all the squirrels and everything else. But you're subsisting on pulses, rice, and then fresh protein in the form, because the river's not far away, catfish. You get a lot of catfish. I can say that they also ate other things which either I couldn't eat or wouldn't eat. There's certain foods that are taboo for women, and so I wasn't supposed to eat it, and so I didn't. That'll get us back to cultural relativism. It'll also get us back to, I didn't want to eat that snake anyway. Yes, which I didn't. All right, so I want you to remember this young woman right here, because she's going to come up later in our discussion about what is your role as a visitor, and what is your role as a 21st century woman, and what is your role as a scientist, and when and how this all emerges. This, by the way, is a former Miamian, Mel Burline. She was here as an undergraduate. She's doing a PhD now at Yale. And there's Mel, and there's a colleague, and they're in one of those huts. Notice all of this is going to be solar powered, so we're able to get satellite uplinks and basically keep in communication, which is pretty fascinating given how far away we are from everything. The other thing is you always want to have your headlamp on, because the sun comes up at about the same time, it gets dark at the same time, you're in the tropics, and you want to be able to see where you're putting your feet, especially if you're looking for the bathroom, which is not a bathroom, it's a hole in the ground. A Congolese colleague, a botanist who's there collecting plant samples, really wonderful guy, and he had the opportunity to do a little study in France. He works at one of the universities in Kinshasa, and he's doing the best he can and gets paid very little money and is a very serious scientist. But if you think about kind of struggling in a situation where education is hard to get, and if you can't support yourself as an academic, really. Okay, I just want to sort of take you into the forest as well. There's lots of trails in the forest. Remember, we're there to study wild bonobos. But this is just sort of you looking at something called THV, terrestrial herbaceous vegetation. He's about 6'3". The vegetation just keeps going above him, and then it just keeps going up meters and meters and meters, right? So you're in very dense, amazing place. There's Deborah, again, a colleague, one of our Congolese field assistants. I call them Congolese, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's also a Congo, but Congolese. And they're collecting insect specimens. So I just sort of want you to think about what you're doing with your day. Or you're doing transects along riverbeds. So you're looking for tracks of the animals, or you're looking for nests of the animals. In some cases you're saying, I think we're lost again. Does anybody have a compass? We play the game like, okay, I'm going to take you off the trail, because there are trails, and you're always looking at your map, and I'm going to take you into some vegetation, and you're going to close your eyes, I'm going to spin you around, and then you're going to find your way out. And the reason for that is that a field worker came in there, she was German, and she went into the forest on the second day and got lost. And the Max Planck Society, this is a Max Planck project, sent in German sniffer dogs. They brought them from Germany. The dogs were miserable with the insects and the heat. They sent in trackers. I mean, they looked for this girl for like a week, and everybody said, she's dead. She showed up in a village like 100 miles away. She just kept moving and moving and moving. She wasn't taken by a predator, and she was air evacuated and said, I never want to go back to the tropics again, and the project said, and we don't want you back. Because she basically presumed, because she was a very competent outdoors person, that she could just go out in the forest and do what she needed to do and get back in camp. And she was probably half a mile away from camp. Do you have a question?
Yeah, when you say predator, do you mean animal or human?
Could be both, but I mostly meant animal.
Okay.
And there are a lot of snakes there, so yeah, you'll see one in a while. Camera traps, so for those of you who are interested in animal behavior and trying to capture images of animals who are shy or not used to people, you set up these remote camera traps around fruiting trees and hope you get images. That's a termite mound. I just thought I'd sort of give you a sense of termites in the tropics, and there are many different kinds of termite taxa, but this is one that we were monitoring for all kinds of reasons. And remember, he's over 6 feet tall, and that thing just went up the side of a tree. Believe it or not, up there is a bonobo nest, and there's another one over in this section. So just honestly, they are there. You get it. This is what's called a tree fall. This is when you actually get light in this dense forest, because mostly it's so dense. You're down on the forest floor, and all of this is above your head. And it's like a cathedral, but it's actually pretty dark. And then when a tree falls, it's like you get this light in. It was also very exciting because we caught some bonobos out on that tree one day. Because these apes, in this particular field site, were not yet fully habituated. And if you're habituated, it's sort of the Jane Goodall story. You can be near the animal, it's not going to be fearful, it's going to behave as you hoped it would normally, and it's not going to flee. They now have full habituation at this site, so good for them. I wanted to give you this as a scale object. Those are buttresses on a tree. Okay, so think of an immense tree, and it's sort of holding itself up with these huge buttresses.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, when you talk about vegetation, and it is the case that all over, not only the neotropics in South America, in Southeast Asia, but certainly in Africa, it's trees like this and others that are part of the problem in so-called development when concessions are sold for loggers to come in and harvest those trees. You can imagine the change in the local environment if you start taking out a lot of trees like that. Right, so that's sort of a kind of vignette of the project. Oh no, okay, now we're going to go to that sanctuary, all right?
Things like that, I totally have no more wonder about how tree houses are built or conceived of. I was like, nope, that could happen.
That's true, yeah. Okay, so you've left the field, and now you're seeing babies. You're seeing bushmeat babies. And these guys have come to a sanctuary called Lola Ya Bonobo, and this is my student, Nell Berline. And this lady, I don't know her name, but they're collectively called the mamas. Why are they called the mamas? Because every one of these babies needs contact all the time. If they still had their mom, they'd be in contact with their mom. And so, and by the way, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 babies in this image. They are either held or carried. They do spend time, with each other and off of the mom if they want to be. But that baby is probably like 1.5 years old. Okay, and we don't really want to. Well, we could, but we're not going to imagine the story that brought him or her here. But they do come in dehydrated, traumatized. What Claudine calls the million-mile stare. She's the founder and basically heart and soul of the sanctuary. She's a Belgian who made her life in Kinshasa and founded this sanctuary. She's basically telling this guy not to move because he's about to just sort of launch himself at me, which is fine with me. But remember, these are infants, and you're going to see some adults, and they play all around the sanctuary. There are areas where they can move freely. And now he's finally coming up. So actually, I am in a picture. He's coming up, and I think he was just sucking on my fingers. Because if you're salty, it's like, oh, it's worth it. Yes, because he doesn't know me, so not necessarily going to be that overwhelmed with my presence. Now, but the point is the sanctuary, these bonobos stay there, and eventually they get too big to be handled. And so she has large, multi-acre compounds with adults in there. They're breeding, in a sense, that's their life now. It's certainly better than a small cage in a zoo. It's certainly better than a lot of sanctuaries I've seen in terms of the expanse of what they get to wander in. But they've lost their freedom. They've lost their autonomy. And they're protected from the bushmeat trade, but in a sense, they keep coming in, and she keeps taking them in. Yeah, I love this. I mean, apes are not supposed to go anywhere near water. Well, they were throwing bananas over the fence, and the bonobos were like, I can get that. I know I can get that. So they were going out and weeding very carefully, collecting the bananas. All right, so that's your brief trip. And now I just want to kind of talk about some things and then give us some time for questions. What constitutes risk and from whose perspective? And the kinds of questions I want to raise are very much for discussion. I don't have the answer. I mean, Leah, what would you consider to be a risk?
Something that has an outcome that you're not sure of.
Okay. Other ideas for risks?
I think a risk almost has a negative connotation to me, like an outcome that like it may be negative, but it's a risk because it may be positive as well, and you're taking that chance almost.
Okay. Other ideas for risks?
Okay, do you know like the Schrodinger's cat thing?
The philosophy thing.
Yeah.
It's like if you look, there's a cat in a box, and you don't know if the cat in the box until you look, but then if you look, you know, or like it's.
Well, no, it's like you put a cat in a box and it's like you put it in there with something that could like potentially kill it or have a 50% chance of killing it. But if you close the box and you never open it again, you don't know whether the cat died or whether the cat lived. So in theory, it's both dead and alive at the same time. So it's kind of like the risk until you get to that point, you don't know whether it's positive or negative. That's how I always thought about it, but I don't know.
So what's in common there is uncertainty.
Yeah.
You don't know the outcome.
It could be like two things at once. You don't know
Right,
until you
right.
actually look.
And often when I think about risk, I think, what is it, I don't mean in a financial sense, but I mean in a personal, temporal, and physical security sense. What is it going to cost me to do that thing? Because a lot of what I do involves taking risks, personal risks, but the rewards have always been worth it for me. But that's the point, from whose perspective. So I'm not going to tell you stories to shock you. I'm just going to try and provoke some ideas for you. If I take a student to the field, we talk a lot about health risks. We talk about security risks. If you're in Kinshasa, because I picked this as being a difficult field site, you're always in a locked vehicle. There's usually guns around. You know,
At the camp, there's guns.
Actually, we'll get to that because we didn't have guns in that camp. I had guns in Uganda, but not guns in this camp. But I'll tell you about that. So remind me, say guns. So what I say to my students is, I know you want to do this. I know you're excited about it. I know you think it's your dream. I want you to go home and I want you to talk to your parents about one thing. And they said, well, what is it? I said, your will.
Wow.
Try to have that conversation with your parents.
Yeah, my parents don't even have will.
Well, that's their problem, isn't it? But it's my problem if you die on me, because I have to know what to do with your body. Because it turns out when either grown-ups or students die in the field, everybody wants to know what to do with the body. And for that German girl who went missing, unless and until she turned up alive, everybody wanted her body. They wanted to find proof that she was alive or dead, so there's that whole thing. And then the few times that students have lost their lives, or field workers, you know, they're all field workers, the question is, if they don't have a will, do you bury them? Do you try and recover the body? Do you ship it home? These are all terrible things to even think about. But I can't take a student to the field unless they have a will. All right? It's like, yeah, we're all immortal, except when we die. The other thing spending months in the field, but I am not living there. I am not carrying a parasite load. I don't have malarial infections. I don't have a compromised immune system. So I feel like, whoa, I'm taking a big risk, but the people who are working with me are dealing with all these other things. And for them, that's everyday life. So my risk for them is normal. You have to kind of conjure with that in your head as well. You think, oh, I'm so brave, I went, I came back, here's my big story. And they're still there, tracking the bonobos, yes.
So was it weird, like, coming home and adjusting to, like, a more high-intensity situation, coming back where hopefully it's a little lower?
You know what happens, and again, I think Garth would know this phrase, you get reverse culture shock. When you go, you have culture shock. When you come back, you are offended by consumption. You are offended by overindulgence. You are really bored by buildings because you're spending pretty much 24/7 outdoors and suddenly you're inside. You also kind of long for that risk or that kind of frisson of what am I missing next, what's going to happen today. On the other hand, you're back in the land of milk and honey, or, hamburgers and pumpkin bread. So, and because you know that you get to leave, that changes everything. It really does change how you see the world. Here's an ethical dilemma. When we were leaving, we left the field site, took us about 2 days to trek out, rivers, savannas, get back to that small village. We know the plane is coming in at a certain date. We've done everything through the sat phone, and I talked about bushmeat. People have kin everywhere, and in Africa, bushmeat is very high status, and people in cities long for it. And if you have a kin, you have strong kinship ties, and or you want to send somebody a tremendous gift, the thing you could do is send them bushmeat. So here we are, primatologists, we're all about conservation, and the pilot is weighing everything because you only have a certain weight. And then people start coming up to us with bloody bags and saying, could you take this to Kinshasa? Could you? And I'm like, I'm not even going to look in a single bag. But the answer is no, no, and no. Now, that was my ethical decision. I had to disappoint them. We were paying for the plane, but more importantly, I couldn't transport dead animals. They found that behavior fairly colonialist and problematic. I'm this, wealthy person who's going out in a plane. They'll never probably be on a plane in their lives, and why can't I just take this, part of a diaper? And and it's all arranged. People meet you at the airport, and I'm like, no, we're not going to do it. Ethical dilemmas.
Wait, do people meet you at the airport, like expecting?
Oh yeah, because they do have phones. They would know if it was coming.
Okay, so they don't meet you if you refuse that.
Oh yeah, no. And the other thing is that there are layers of communication you have no access to. I mean, fundamentally, you walk in and you are privileged and you have all this stuff, but people are talking. They won't talk directly to you, and it's certainly not to me as a white woman. And also because I'm older, I'm a mama, as opposed to a mama carrying a bonobo. I'm a mama who has this sort of respect status because I've lived long enough to get old. That's a big deal. I mean, most people don't get to be my age there. And because I also have all of these colleagues with me. So I represent this kind of foreign, I won't say colonial, but privileged presence, and I have resources. So people are talking, and they're probably also thinking, like, what might she give me when she leaves? Which is true. People tend to give their stuff away. And so you feel really uncomfortable with that whole question as well, because, you're working together, and yet, I've got all this stuff, and they're dressed in rags. You know, I've got rubber boots, I've got this, I've got that, I've got all this technology. So you live with what I would call privilege and the guilt that comes with privilege. On the other hand, you know that you can help in certain ways, and you have to decide from an ethical point of view what you can afford to help with, and I don't mean financially, I just mean in terms of what you're willing to give away, and also what you're willing to send back. So we're always limited by weight, so I'm people probably find this hilarious, I'm like a grammar freak. So I love this little book called Strunk and White.
Yes. Style.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
It's $10. Yes, so, and they're very light and very small.
Yeah.
So I usually bring like 10 of them in with me. And they go usually to mothers and children. And then it becomes like the family thing. You know, it's like, we've got.
What
Or-
is it?
It's a small handbook for writing.
By E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web and And,
It's a wonderful book,
Short Living.
and honestly, it's my favorite style guide. Some people think it's too old school, I think it's brilliant. But anyway, so I bring in those. I bring in a lot of clothes, which I know, like I remember when I went to that sanctuary, I just went back to a guest house, took off every piece of clothing I had, put it in a plastic bag, had a shower, which I hadn't had in months, because you get bucket baths out there every day. You get a bucket of water, good luck with that. And yeah, but yeah, it's the only time you're actually cool all day, so you're looking for that bucket bath. But you just put your clothes in the bag, and then I remember I put them by the shower, and I knew I was leaving them. And we were getting our bags into the Land Rover, and the woman came running from the guest house like, Madame, Madame, however you say your clothes in French. And I said, no, gâteau is cake.
Yeah.
Cadeau? Cadeau?
That's a bag, I think.
I leave.
Yeah, it's like, and she was like, oh my God! Here's a pair of blue jeans, it's a work shirt, it's a this, it's a that. I was like, that's for you. I mean, it's not like I was saying, oh, you may have my dirty clothes. But I just realized I didn't want them anymore, I didn't need them anymore. And that was just beyond valuable. So, you just constantly struggle with what do you do. So medicine. You go into the field and you are carrying antibiotics. You're carrying medication in case you have a serious injury, you need painkillers. You're carrying anti-malarials. You're carrying a stronger drug if you get malaria. You've got basically a whole kit. That whole kit, and then there's things like aspirin and bandages and just stuff. Go open your medicine cabinet. People don't have that. They don't have that stuff, right? They don't go to the pharmacy. They don't. So you have to decide what you're going to leave behind. And I always leave behind whatever I can, because it then becomes kind of like the camp pharmacy, because people always are coming up and asking you for an aspirin or something else. And then you have to decide, okay, what will I go out with? And so I always go out with needles, because I don't want to be without hypodermics in case I get injured and I need something. And I don't want to use any needles that are local, so we've got sterile needles. And I usually keep painkillers in case I get injured, because I'm a wimp about pain. So, and then the odd bandage and stuff, but it's like what you're leaving, it seems inconsequential to you, and yet it could save somebody's life, or at least make the difference in terms of them maybe surviving a malarial episode. And again, we sort of take this stuff for granted, but every one of these items is extreme and extremely hard to get. Now, some bad images, and then I want to get to that story about the student. Oh yeah, things to be scared of. That guy was killed in camp.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Is that
How
a
is
snake?
Oh, it's a snake head, yeah. Yeah, you see that? That's where the venom comes.
It has a beak.
Well, no, that's the injector. What they did, this guy who killed it, he just took 2 sticks and then he opened up the jaw so we could see the dentition. And they'd already punted it with a big. But this snake was just sort of wandering around camp and very, very dangerous.
Oh my goodness.
It
looks dangerous.
It's a kind of mamba, I think. But all of the men in camp just said, everybody get back.
Yeah, they knew it was poisonous.
Yeah, and then, and off its head came, and then they did that. They said, well, we'll get the head for you, we'll put it on a banana leaf, and then you can photograph it. So I'm like, if you could hold it, I'll be over here. I didn't put it anywhere near it, yeah. There are more snake stories, but not for tonight. Now this isn't from this site, but it's something I want you to think about. This is the standard snare that you find all over Africa. It is usually, and this has been chopped, but it's usually attached to some kind of sapling. It's there in the ground, and basically animals step into it. And then they're caught. It tightens, and they're there until they die of shock and or until somebody finds them alive and dispatches them. So snares are everywhere. Again, because of...
Do humans often step into them?
No. No. For better or worse, we don't. Whether we're vigilant about... And in fact, there are anti-snare patrols all over research sites. So you send rangers out or other people out to basically find the snares, and it's a kind of, you take the snares out, and they get replaced. You take the snares out, they get replaced. So it's a kind of arms race all the time. But I wanted you to think about snares. That is bushmeat. Cooked and smoked bushmeat, CAR. These are all apes. That's an ape skull. So all of these were animals who were once alive. Oh, here's a civet cat right here, just laying on top. You can see that skull, you can see that crest right there. So these were once, actually I think these are gorillas. They were out there in the forest, they were living their lives. They were shot, and then they were cut up and they were smoked, and then they're transported out and they wind up in a market. So this is the story about guns. We don't have guns at Louis Catal. It's just a decision the field workers made. But we started hearing a lot of gunfire pretty regularly at a certain part of the range. And people went over exploring, I might add, all male. And they found a bushmeat camp. And they found just stacks of monkeys smoked, and part of elephants, and just kilo after kilo after kilo. They were sort of accumulating it. They abandoned the camp. They must have heard the people coming. And it kind of represented decimating that wildlife by several kilometers. And, so come back to camp, reported, people were a bit worked up. A few days later, out in the forest, walking along a trail, and there's 3 of us, I think, no, there's 4 of us. We look ahead, and we see a really tall guy coming toward us, and he has an AK-47 across his chest. And behind him are 2 boys, more like his age, carrying these big wooden frame backpacks full of smoked bushmeat. And we're sort of doing this, and then we stop. There's a lot of Lingala that goes back and forth. And I'm standing behind one of my field workers. I always get behind people. It's like, but I'm like watching what is going on and all this conversation. And then the conversation is over, and we go that way, and the guy with the kids and the gun goes that way. And so a few minutes later, I said, what happened? What did you learn? And my colleague said, I didn't learn anything. I just watched his hand. He had his hand on the trigger the whole time. Yeah. So I was like, and now I'm going to cry. So there was this kind of negotiation that he was going to go through our camp with the bushmeat. He was asking where the river was, and we were just going to go on our way.
And so, he had to, negotiate basically for your lives to, keep growing?
I don't think it was about lives. He just wanted information, but I think he was trying to send a really strong signal. And I was trying to be extremely small. But I didn't know about the trigger thing, because I was just sort of watching the boys with all the meat, but the guy with the gun had his hand on the trigger. Yeah, see? Speaking of risks. Yeah. So bushmeat, those are gorilla hands, I'm afraid to say, hands and feet in a market. Also, I haven't really touched on this, but if we think about resource extraction all over the tropics, but this is an example from Gabon, they have resources to sell to international businesses. Most of them are European or North American or Southeast Asian. And so, and you can see the size of the canopy around, but this is some kind of mining extraction. And what they, in this case, the Gabonese government says is, we'll sell this mining concession to this company. They'll pull out ore, goodbye forest, and we'll get cash. We'll be in the cash economy. So they've got resources, they've got population, they've got people who have needs. And how do you get the balance between that and their wildlife resources? Remember what we did to the buffalo. Remember what we did to the passenger pigeon. Remember what we did to all kinds of fauna in our own country. So, but I just want you to see this kind of image, and you can see the scale of it. And then, yeah, there's less. Okay, oh, there's me. Okay, right. Oh, okay, I'll get back to that now. Okay, so there's Deborah. And she is a really lovely young woman. She's a graduate student in Belgium. And you can see that she's tall and athletic and so on. And very, very nice woman. But she made a decision in the camp because she said, I'm a Western woman, I'm liberated, I have my rights. I'm going to, when I'm in camp, I'm going to dress as I want to. Now, right there, she has trousers on, and that's all good. She also has on like a camisole or something. But what she decided to start doing was wear very short shorts, because she said she was hot. And this went on for a couple of days, and you could see that people, the men in the camp, the guys from the village, and the cook and everybody else, they were getting more and more unhappy. And they finally came and they talked to him, because they were not going to talk to her. And they basically explained that from their point of view and their culture, this is the most sexual part of a woman's body. Not her breasts, not her butt, this. And that she was being insulting and provocative. And that they really were pleased, could she, cover herself. And her view was, I don't really have to, there's nothing wrong with my legs. I mean, I'm my own person. If they have a problem with it, they can look somewhere else. And we had a long discussion, and finally we just had to really look at it. She's a biologist, and I was trying to look at it as an anthropologist. I was trying to look at cultural context and respect and being a guest and compromise. How do you figure out what you can manage? And how do you figure out whether you're making too much of a compromise? In any case, she eventually kind of succumbed to the older people's authority, but she found the whole thing kind of offensive. And she just felt that she'd been bullied. And I had long conversations with her, and she said, well, you're older and you don't understand women's liberation. I was like, oh yeah, I've been there, done that. But what I was trying to persuade her of, and I don't know that I ever did, was the issue of cultural sensitivity, that she was a young, attractive woman from that other part of the world. She was surrounded by these young men who probably had, I don't know what their prospects were for, intimacy, but she was basically a provocation for them, and also an embarrassment, and they were just sort of so uncomfortable. And so eventually she, started wearing trousers against her will. But I just want to kind of remind you, you can be in a situation and feel what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. And for me, it's always erring on the side of respecting and also realizing this is not my country, this is not my forest, I am bringing resources there, but that I also have to earn their respect and in a sense feel comfortable that I'm not pushing my agenda on them. But we can talk about that. Now, a couple of nasty pictures.
When they were describing that in this culture this is the most sexual part of the body, would it be like comparable to like if someone came into America and insisted on wearing like a man insisted on wearing like crotchless pants, or a woman had her breast showing?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. It would be like walking around with your breast shown. Yeah, I mean, women don't show this part of their body. They don't.
Yeah.
Unless they're intimate and they're inside. And they usually have a skirt on, and it's usually down to about here. Yeah, so this is what's interesting is that how you objectify women and men and what's sexual. For them, this is hypersexual. They don't care about breasts. Breasts are everywhere. Breasts are velvet. Breasts are out. You know, babies are on breasts. It's just not a big deal. But this is a big deal. Yeah. All right. So, okay, that's me with so-called habituated chimpanzees. So these aren't bonobos. These are chimpanzees in Uganda. But I just wanted to show you these lovely guys because you can see the final picture is a lovely photo from that community. But this I wanted to show you. It's a nasty, nasty picture. He got speared, and he got speared because people try and protect their crops. So if we think about, all over Africa, he's in farmers' territory because they keep clearing chimpanzee habitat where there used to be chimpanzee food, and then they basically identify what we're growing as food, and then they start taking it, and then we start defending it. So I just want you to kind of think of that as a kind of ongoing dilemma for apes everywhere and other animals. Okay, and there's my last picture. That's a brand new baby. He's a couple of hours old. Yeah, and whenever I get the chance to just spend time with mothers and infants, I'm very happy indeed. And this baby was just so beautiful, and his mother was very tender with him and very attentive. So I think I will do more than stop there, and I've really been going on for a while. So questions? Yes?
Really random question first. Do chimps and apes and do they ever have twins or like multiple births?
They can have twins, but they twin just about as frequently as Homo sapiens.
And can you differentiate whether they're fraternal or identical, or do they have identical twins?
They do have identical, and they also have fraternal.
Okay.
The problem
You have to test for it.
Yeah, well,
Sure.
sometimes you can see that they're the same sex, and sometimes literally, every ape has its own face. They look the same.
Oh, really?
It's like,
Wow.
yeah, they're twins.
That's so cool.
They are so twin. They are, yeah. Now, the dilemma for the mom is to be able to have enough milk for both of them. Generally, one doesn't survive. I know of one set of twins at Gombe in Tanzania that survived, and it's like the super mom of the group. She just made sure. Yeah, so they made it through, but usually one does. Yeah.
I was curious about the issue of habituation, and earlier you were talking about how, like, at the site you were working at, that you were showing us in DRC, that they weren't habituated,
Not
and
yet.
you said now they are.
Yes.
And I guess I really don't understand. I mean, ethically, is habituation anything at all similar to, you know, when you have issues with, I mean, lesser, I guess, of intelligence animals, like birds and things that they have an issue readapting? Well, they're already wild. I guess I'm wondering, how does habituation work? Is it just they get used to you and you can be around, or is there any sort of reliance, or?
Ideally, no reliance. Ideally, no provisioning. People don't do that anymore. That used to be a technique that they used back in the 60s, but now it's repeated exposure to us. We are generally not moving. We try not to give eye contact. If the animal looks nervous, we don't follow it. It's a very gradual process, and individuals within a group have different responses. Some become quickly habituated and bolder, and some never really feel comfortable. In general, males habituate faster than females. And I think that makes sense given that females often have infants. And they're basically cautious about approaching, and also I think temperamentally they're just watching people very carefully. Although, I mean, one of the best days of my life, I was in Gombe, I think in '96, and then I came back in 2000. And so I hadn't been there in 4 years, but I knew everybody in the community. I mean, they were growing up. But I went into the forest, and I knew that one of Fifi's daughters was there, who was maybe 2 or 3 the last time I saw her. And she was with a whole group of chimpanzees. And I just sat down and I started getting out some notepaper or something, and she went up a tree and across the canopy and down beside me. And then she reached over and she went like, and then she left. I was like, no, she's just checking out. She was like, and we're done.
She's real.
And she came back because they also know strangers.
Yeah.
They know when you bring somebody new in. Yeah. And then they're always like checking you out. But the ideal thing is that they go about their lives as if you were invisible. Now, it's a kind of philosophical question. You're not there. What are they doing? Now, some people use remote cameras to kind of do that kind of control question. You know, maybe they're looking at behavior when researchers are not around, or they're working on habituation and they're putting up camera traps in places where the animals are using a lot of tools, where there might be a lot of social behavior, and then they kind of compare it over time. And I mean, I would like to believe, I believe it's the case, that if you do habituation right, you are making the least intrusion on their lives. And in some cases, it's really painful because, difficult, not painful. You see animals that are injured.
Right.
You see some things you wish you hadn't seen, and tremendous conflict. You know, when you see infants that are orphaned and you realize this baby's not going to make it.
But
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there a time when there's like that where the infant's been abandoned and you can take it, or no?
I would never do that in a wild population. I never would. And that for me is a line I can't cross. And also, if you touched that infant and if there were other apes around, even though they're not going to take care of it, as soon as that baby squeals, you're done.
so even if they're not taking care of it.
So I have a colleague, she's a really good field primatologist, and she studied gorillas at Karasoke, so she's studying mountain gorillas. And she was studying mother-infant development, particularly looking at sex differences in development. And there are snares up there as well. And she'd been studying there for about a year and a half, and she knew all the groups, and she knew all the infants and all the mothers. And one day an infant got snared. And she was there by herself. And the infant was screaming and squealing, and she just decided she couldn't stand it. And she went up, and she must have had secateurs, they're like cutters, and she cut the snare, and the baby got free, but it was still screaming, got scooped up by the mother. Anyway, she went back to camp and just said what she'd done, and people said, you know, we get it. So she goes back maybe the next day or 2 days after, and she's just getting ready to do her observation, and the silverback rushes her, because he had seen that whole interaction. He did not see it as a rescue. He rushed her, and he bit her behind her knee, badly. She comes off
The
the
male?
mountain.
Not the mother, but a male.
The adult male, the silverback, the guy in charge,
Oh, wow.
because his job is to kind of protect everybody. So she comes off the mountain. She's got rehab for, I don't know, 6-8 weeks. Goes back up the mountain. Goes back to the same group. He looks at her and he charges her. This time he doesn't bite her. He simply pushes her down. He's just holding her. And she said, I could feel that if he pushed, he was going to break my ribs. He just held her down. And then he walked away. And then she realized she could never go back to that group.
How absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. And she did the right thing. She got that baby out of a snare. From his point of view, she made the baby scream. And he didn't understand. What he did understand is she seemed to make a baby scream.
That's amazing though that they can, I mean, you think of them being able to like control your strength and like,
Oh.
but that
That's what I'm
in
saying.
itself is amazing. Like,
Oh, yeah.
You would have thought he would have just,
Well, I
Yeah.
asked some people who work with gorillas, and they said adult males, they call it punishing females because they're so sexually dimorphic. They don't kill them. They don't smash them. They just hold them or push them.
wow.
And I think, quote unquote, in his head, I'm just going to hold her down,
And show her she can.
and she can't be here. I mean, again, we don't know what's in his head, but yeah. And she said, well, I will not
Good
be
thing
studying
she was
that
a
group
female.
again. Pardon?
Good thing she was a female.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know somebody that's been bitten in the foot by a silverback.
So how well can how differentiate between the sexes of humans that are observing them?
They know what's what.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely know what's
Yeah.
what. Yeah, which is why I never take on, you know, adult male chimpanzees, I always just behave. Anyway, I'm just here, just consider me part of the canopy. Yeah.
See, that's interesting that he didn't understand that, because you think the baby would have understood that. Like,
The baby was terrified and screaming and in pain. Yeah. You don't get agency or directionality there, you just,
As far
I
as,
think.
as far as respecting cultural differences and cultural traditions goes, I'm all for that, and I agree with you, but at the same time, there are some that, I don't know, like, for a couple extreme cases, like, you know, the burqas, they're made for, like,
Burqa, hijab, right?
Yeah.
Islets, yeah.
yeah, I mean, they're made for the purpose of, you know, because of women in that society are viewed in a certain way, and then in some places in Africa, I know you have, like, female, circumcision, yeah, so
I would
like,
call it genital mutilation, but that's just me.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to respect,
totally.
but like, how do
No,
you,
but see, I'm an anthropologist,
How
and
do
I
you-
use cultural relativism, but I'm not a fool.
okay, cause that's my thing, like,
Yeah.
I wanna respect people's culture.
Yeah.
And I don't,
Yeah.
like, if I'm, when I was in Italy and if I went into church or a cathedral, you know, I would cover my arms,
Yes,
I'd cover
of
my
course.
legs,
Yes.
and my feet, but, you know, there's a certain point where you just can't respect it, because it's just,
So that's what I would call kind of, it's kind of situational ethics. You make a decision based on what you can allow yourself to compromise and what you won't. So if someone tries to make a fairly strong defense of female circumcision, I'm not easily persuaded. In part because I know the anatomy, I know what happens, and I also see the consequences for women in terms of childbirth and sexuality and all of that. Fibrillation being the worst, by the way. So for me, it's issue by issue.
okay.
And in this case, because we were a closed community, because there basically was nowhere for those boys to go, you know? And we'd come back to camp, and she'd get on her tiny shorts, and these guys they were literally sitting like this some days. Yeah, I mean, like, I can't, you know. Also, they're young boys, so it's sort of embarrassing for them too. Yeah, I know.
and almost like they're trying to respect her, and she's like not letting them in there.
Well, because from her point of view, they've got to figure out, you know, she kept saying, it's the 21st century, you know, what's going on? And I just said,
Unless you're in a nudist colony, imagine a woman walking around with nothing on her. Yeah,
I
well,
know.
Or like
Yeah.
even worse, like if the guy was walking around with like his bottom half showing, like we'd be so uncomfortable with that.
yeah. I have a friend who works in New Guinea, and men there wear penis sheaths, and that's what they wear on their
Wait,
genitals.
What are
Oh, it's a gourd. What you do is you have your penis, and you put the gourd over it, and then you have a kind of like string that goes around. Right? Yeah, and so when I talked to this guy, he says, "Oh, men would be just absolutely mortified if they went out without their penis sheath." And I said, "So that's what they're wearing?" They said, "Well, yeah, because you're undressed if you don't have it on."
the penis sheath?
Got it. It's a gourd. It's a gourd. And they're in different shapes, different colors.
It seems like an issue, like you're saying about compromise, like how much is it worth to you? Like something like wearing longer shorts.
Yeah.
It seems like on some issues you're willing, even if you're like, okay, well I don't agree with this philosophy or idea, but it doesn't really matter. And
Yeah.
but obviously with something like we're talking about genital mutilation, like there's a spectrum of what is just like, okay, like I don't really care, I'll follow the custom,
Right.
versus things are kind of like even with custom and cultural relativism, you have to be like.
I think there's
You have to-
almost like a
That's what I'm
health
saying.
thing. Like I think that's almost the line for a lot of people. Like when it becomes a health issue, it's almost a thing. I mean, obviously there's still like things within there, but like once it's a health issue, I think a lot of people draw that line.
Well, here's a kind of ethical conundrum which is going to happen right now in the U.S. there's a strong pushback by people who I consider to be, informed, who have decided they're not going to inoculate their children. Yeah.
See, like my little brother's autistic, so I just
Oh,
yeah.
so you know that whole fiction. Yeah.
I know mothers who are like anti-vaccine and they think like the government's plotting to give their kids autism. I'm just like, you're nuts, and I think they should reopen mental asylums and put you in them.
But other than that, you don't have a strong opinion.
Yeah. I just
No, like that's totally.
But it's a public health issue. It will become one. That's why we had measles here in Ohio, and why we had that whooping cough epidemic. Yeah, epidemic.
Okay, what I don't get, and I realize this is a little extreme, but okay, we have to have licenses for driving, and licenses to get married, and licenses to fly a plane, and operate
But we
heavy
don't
machinery.
need licenses.
But we don't
for
have to get
parents.
licenses to procreate. And like I feel like that's one of the most important things you could do.
So we're about to have
Yeah.
sex now. Do you have your license?
Do you have your license with you?
Not having sex, but for having children, like it's so much well, there's been sterilization.
Oh my goodness! I'm not going there. No eugenics, please.
You just hit the wall there.
Wow, I've never thought about that.
Okay, going back to the bush babies.
Bushmeat babies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they go into the sanctuary
Mm-hmm.
and they grow up there as adults,
Yeah, they do.
do the adults then breed and create new? And do they go out in the wild then, or?
So will eventually they just get
Population.
too crowded?
Potentially. Unless they try and do some reintroductions.
There's
I
no
can tell you
reintroduction program?
There was one reintroduction program from this sanctuary that failed miserably. It failed because they found an area where there weren't bonobos, but they had to choose which bonobos to send. And then they sent in some new trackers. The bonobos didn't know, and they didn't know the bonobos, and everybody thinks bonobos are, love, peace, sex, it's all cool. Bonobos.
60 cities.
No, it was really sad that two of the males.
He made the pumpkin bread.
You made the pumpkin bread? You're our hero.
God bless you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
God bless you.
Yeah, we definitely enjoyed it. They attacked two people and one guy lost most of his face. So this is not easily accomplished because once they're in a sanctuary and they've spent a lot of time around people, they lose inhibition about approaching and about physical contact. So reintroduction is really hard to do. They've done a couple of successful reintroductions with some sanctuary chimpanzees, but you're usually going to have a mortality rate 60 to 70%. Some people say that's worth the risk to just get them back out into some kind of environment, but some kind of habitat. But in the meantime, the habitat is shrinking. So, there is also the question in Africa, in Asia, and in any place that has wild animals, will it be the case that eventually all of those animals will live in circumscribed sanctuaries, reserves, parks? And how will we keep the boundaries for an animal like an elephant, like a giraffe? And how much space do they need? And then who protects the boundaries? There are a lot of parks that I've been in Africa, which are, I call them paper parks, because we can look at them on paper, we can look on a map, but nobody is monitoring them, and there's meat coming out of them all the time. Or people are coming in to poach them. So elephants would be poached all the time for ivory in parks. And now there's a kind of escalating war between poachers and guards. So in the park I was in Uganda, 2 years ago, one of the guards that I knew, one of the Uganda wildlife rangers, he was shot and killed by a poacher. Because the guy was in there after Uganda cob, and he just killed the guard and then killed some cob and then took what he wanted. So conflict over bushmeat is big, conflict over how much space the animals need, and then it's hard for us in the West, but what my case is, I try and say, this is your natural patrimony. And that from a tourist point of view, from ecotourism, from everything else, if you can do a better job at conservation than we have, you know, in a sense, you and your children will have a better future from that, as long as you can find a way to take care of people's basic needs. Because it's really hard to persuade people, you know, take care of these animals for the future when you can't eat. You know, when you can't figure out how to feed your family. Or, you know, don't cut the forest. Well, we don't have anything except wood to burn. That's how we make charcoal. That's how we cook. So population pressure, and then political instability. So, I mean, what's sitting under all of that is a kind of series of political conflicts that don't allow people to kind of engage in what I would say is the kind of process of building a future, trying to educate their children, feed them, you know, have a decent life, basic dignity, the things that we often take for granted and which they're desperate to have, but certainly education. They want their children to be educated so badly, so badly. So that's what I spend a lot of time doing. If I think about philanthropy in East Africa, particularly for school for young kids, because if you get them when they're like between 4 and 7, and you can take care of their nutrition and early education, that really makes a difference later on. It really does.
So you said like a lot of your porters were like younger.
Yeah.
Do they like go back to their
Village.
every day and?
No, they bring the stuff in, they unload it, and then they go back to the village, and then they just have their lives there with their families. And when it's time to take a trip back out, we come back to the field site and carry stuff out. And
Okay.
they'll periodically come in with fresh food.
Okay, because I was gonna ask like if you had like locals that would like help out around camp and stuff.
Yeah,
and,
what's
like,
in camp is the fisherman, the cook, and 3 to 4 trackers, and they're on 2-week cycles. They come in and out. They come in for 2 weeks, and then they go back to the village with their wives and their family, and another group of guys come in.
Okay, so like, do you have any like even unofficial things where you like talk about the work you're doing or like stuff like that to help with like?
That would be a matter of language. I don't
Okay.
speak Lingala, and my French is hopeless. They have very little French, and that's what they
So have you
speak
ever been
Lingala.
involved with the science education program or like have people asked you about that or anything?
Tell me more.
In field, have you been like?
Oh, you mean in
asked-
terms of talk? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been a talking head a lot of times if I can speak English. So I'll just go to a school or I'll go down to a field camp and give a quote-unquote lecture. You know, just tell them what I'm doing. And then I talk to the kids all the time if they speak English. And then if you're not careful, then you basically have like a trail of kids.
Have you had that?
Oh, yeah. And in camp, that's fine. You know, I just say, here's a piece of paper. Go a piece of paper. Or, I mean, it just breaks your heart, though. I mean, you see them going through the trash. You always have to keep things in a trash cupboard so that baboons and other things don't get in. But the kids want to get in there. What do they want to get out? They want to get out a sardine can. And then they get a piece of string and they punch a hole and they drag it around like a toy. That's their toy. So whatever you have is so valuable. Whatever you throw away, you have to it's terrible. It's your garbage. You have to say, do you want this? It seems wrong, you know? But I'd rather offer it than throw it away.
It seems
That's why I
very
this
much
place.
like the train on the string though, actually.
I know.
And,
Alana,
like-
you had a question? Were you raising your hand? Yeah. I thought you were. Just kidding. Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
How do the babies get to the sanctuary? I kind of glossed over that.
Claudine, either they show up in the market, in which case they're confiscated by the government, because they're required to, it's a highly endangered species, and then they bring them straight to the sanctuary. They say, here's some more. Or she'll find out that somebody has one as a pet, and she'll go and persuade them to give it to her, because she knows it's going to end in tears. And I have seen some images. I haven't seen the actual babies, but I've seen them come in, and you saw them healthy and restored and looking good. They come in, they are completely gaunt, They have what she calls the million-mile stare in their face. They're clutching and rocking. In many cases, they've also got buckshot or other kinds of wounds from guns. And then what she calls is, can you persuade them to live? Some of them just die of grief. They're so traumatized, and they're so lost, and they're so young. And that's why, in many cases, if you can get a mama or somebody else who's going to just basically devote themselves and keep this baby on their body and keep it warm and just keep it moving and keep it
Does she employ
what?
those women?
Pardon?
Does she
I'll
employ
volunteer for that
Yeah.
job.
Those are great jobs.
I'll take one.
People love those jobs.
I wanna be a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my picture.
If you bring the babies to like Italy, and I'll just live there and like carry them around forever.
It's a weird look.
Well, what's interesting? It's wonderful for rehab, but you have to be very careful that they don't do what's called cross-species identification, so that they don't get confused that they're a bonobo and not a human being. And then a lot of babies, if they do survive what I would call kidnapping from the wild, some of them get shipped out illegally, and they wind up on beaches in Spain, chimpanzees. They used to go to Italy, they don't go to Italy anymore. A lot of them wind up in the Middle East, and
Like street shows or?
they dress them up and they drug them. The beach chimps of Spain are horrible. They're drugged, and then people take pictures with them on the beach. And there's like this completely comatose, zoned out infant chimpanzee, with this goofy costume on. And they do that for a number of years until they make enough money, and then they shoot the animal, because they can't do anything with it. So yeah, it's just a way to make money. But there are sanctuaries, and there are rehab projects, and there are lots of protections out there for apes. They are highly endangered, so they're protected by all kinds. They're protected by CITES, conservation, international trade, endangered species, something like that. Yeah. So I think it's better than it has been in quite some time, and I'm encouraged. I'm more worried about helping people at the other end, because if you don't help people, the animals are not going to survive.
Right.
I mean, it makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
They want
If
to have a life.
if they're desperate enough to do, like, yeah.
Yeah,
That makes
you have to
sense.
think about what they need as well. And understand that they can become tremendous advocates for their own wildlife, and in some cases give their life.
Like
A lot of
cases
people,
of the rangers.
yes, and a lot of men have died up in Karasoke in Rwanda. I mean, a number of guards have been shot up there, and they just keep going back out. They keep protecting the gorillas.
It seems very much that kind of better enforcement is an increasing, like you were talking about, how do you enclose these sanctuaries and things, is really just kind of treating the symptoms, whereas the more important thing is giving people other opportunities than poaching and hunting bush.
Yeah. And something that's worked very well for some projects is to involve local communities in developing ecotourism, providing housing, providing guides, and alternative education. And then the key is, how much of your profits from an ecotourist venture go to the local community?
Right.
How much are you willing to give them because now I think to see a mountain gorilla, you're going to think this number's nuts, but it's either $300 for half an hour or $500.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for your glimpse, to take those pictures. And of course you're going to be there a couple of days, and so you're going to get that permit. So people drop thousands of dollars on these gorilla expeditions, and just a few $100s can transform, possibilities for some local people.
And I know some people who, like our family friends, one of the guys a big hunter, and so he's done several safaris, and they hunt things like giraffe, very what's the least concerned, very common species that aren't endangered at all. And you think, as much as hunting or ecotourism feels like a very colonial sort of, you're the white Westerner coming with all your wealth to entertain me, come see this. It also, I think, like you're saying, as long as it's going to the right places, it's what better way to help out than to bring, really all they need is just to bring all that money and to be like, I want to pay you to do things that are better than going and coaching you.
Or letting them have some choices about what they can do with their lives in general. And again, it's always about education. So I love driving through Uganda, and depending on the town you're in, the children's uniforms are different colors. You'll go along a road and they'll all be in pink, or then they'll be in blue, and they'll all be in yellow, and they're absolutely scrubbed down and ready to go to school. But you have to have money to pay school fees. It's not free. So everybody's saving for their children, trying desperately to save for their children.
I remember that being a big issue, like when we went to Belize, like tourism was like huge, but so was like funds for public schooling.
Yeah.
And we were helping out in the high school, but it was really interesting. The high school ran ecotourism programs as well, and so the children, for their after-school activity, for their weekend activities, would be the guides for bike tours, for kayaking, for all these things for the tourists. And part of the money would go to the school, and part of the money would go to their school fees, and to their parents, and then maybe some spending money for them. And it was really actually a good program. So there's things like that set up. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think you can't just think of it as this kind of charity. What people want to do is work with dignity, and they want to feel that what they contribute not only has value, but is valued. I'm doing something important, and I'm receiving, it's hardly a living wage, but I'm receiving something for it. And that I have control over what I want to do. I have at least some options. And that's the real key. How many options do people have? You have infinite options. We're going to go back to risk, and then I'm going to stop. We were talking about how do you define risk, and I've been working with a couple of students about the issue, about the qualities that are identified in young people who will apply for postgraduate fellowships. One of the things that they look for routinely is risk-taking. The willingness to try new things and, in a sense, to experiment and fail, but try again. And also be willing to put themselves in an uncomfortable position. So not always take the safe route. Not that they are thrill-seeking, but just that they show. So often, when they're looking at those situations, they're looking for people who are willing to take risks, and how that combines with leadership. So I mean, you're in a scholar leader dorm, and I don't know how many people talk to you about how to develop leadership or how to think about being empathetic as well as exercising judgment. But all of that, in some ways, also comes back to what are you willing to risk with each other? And how much can you how much can you push an issue? How far can you push an issue and feel comfortable with it? And then when do you start feeling uncomfortable? And when do you start backing away? And why do you do that?
I just went to a speaker who kind of said he owns a credit union in Florida, and he was talking about how they hire people who are risk takers. So how do you encourage that, especially for someone who's risk averse?
How do you demonstrate that on a resume?
Well, okay.
Or an application.
Okay, I think you take a risk when you are on a particular trajectory, and then you say, but I want to try this as well. Or I want to stop doing this for a while, and I want to do this over here. Or I want to reprioritize what's important to me. And I'm not saying put your brains at risk, but that you say there are other things that I want to spend time with, and I know there are, I think it's 168 hours in the week. It's that famous number. It's all you've got. It seems like a really crappy little number, doesn't it? I know, because I count the hours. I got it all done, right? But how are you, if you're going to take a risk, how are you going to reapportion your time? And what are you willing to put in jeopardy if you're reapportioning your time? I mean, how rigid are you? How flexible are you? would argue at what's called lateral thinking. You know, if I can't go ahead, can I go to the side? If I can't go this way, can I go that way? If that's my problem, do I have 3 solutions instead of 1? All of that is risk-taking, actually. And it's also creativity. I mean, those two things often go together. And it's really hard because I think you're all high achieving and you've all got particular goals and aims that you want to get to in your life. And I'm not saying you're following the same path, because to work as hard as you all do means you're hard on yourselves. Okay, you push yourselves in ways that a lot of students choose not to do. So you already know that that's something, it's a quality that you have. At some point you have to decide, what else do I want to do with my life at this tender age? Often what I've seen students do, and it's really difficult and it's a risk, they finish undergraduate education. Let's say they don't get into the graduate program they want, or they're just, they know that mentally and emotionally they need a time out. They just need to do something else, but they find something that they're passionate about, and then they go and they do that thing for a year, for 2 years. So Mel went to Thailand for 2 years. She was working as a volunteer, woman who's at Yale, working on a Gibbon project. It was still primatology, but she said, I just wasn't ready for graduate school. I just couldn't imagine being in graduate school. Well, she was accepted to Yale while we were sitting in the middle of DRC. She said, Linda, come look at the scene now. I was like, yeah, that's kind of nice. How much money you're getting?
I thought you were going to say
All
when
right.
they delivered the big acceptance letter in the mail, and I was like, wait.
No.
The acceptance letter came in the middle of the
Well,
DRC.
the point is, you know, she could have gone to a couple of other schools. She was trying, she was applying, and then she just said, I can't stand it. I can't stand being at school right now. And then I said, so what do you want to do? And she said, well, I want to keep doing primatology, but I want to do some traveling. And I said, then let's look at some places where you can work as a field assistant. Let's look at parts of the world you're interested in. So off she went to Thailand. I mean, not that simple, but, you know, she was well qualified. And then I think that experience actually helped catapult her into that graduate program. But she took a risk. And a lot of
Wait,
people
was she
think,
accepted to Yale before she went to Thailand, or because she went to Thailand?
I think because she went to Thailand.
Okay.
I think the person who accepted her was looking at what she'd accomplished in the field. And also, a lot of times for students, you know, if they're looking for research funding or they're looking for very prestigious graduate programs, they're competing with people with so much experience. Sometimes going straight from undergraduate, you don't have a whole lot that you can point to. I mean, you can point to a good GPA, you can point to some research projects, you can point to some presentations, but you haven't been in the field. Or maybe you've done a field school, but it's different, you know, if you want to kind of pursue this kind of thing. And in some cases, you find out you hate the field. It's like, I never want to go back. I now know I want to work either in a sanctuary or I want to work in a zoological society. Some people just hate the field. That's fine. Not everybody's made for it. Not everybody should go. I've had people go who basically freaked out, had to get out.
I'm guessing it's not such a great idea for vegetarians.
Oh, it's hell.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really hell.
So count that off mine.
Well, I mean, the worst is I once went with a vegan. Yeah.
Oh.
Not good. Didn't end well. I don't judge,
Like,
but.
No, I couldn't be a vegan here. Like, that's just-
Yeah.
but
Anyway, folks, you've been very, very kind and interested, so thank you for your time. And